What's the worst thing God can do to you? Kind of scary question, isn't it? I mean, the Bible is full of stories. Some of the central stories of our faith involve God doing some pretty terrible, powerful things, right? There's a whole list of 12 plagues against Egypt, from locusts and frogs to darkness to rivers turned to blood to the death of the firstborn. But if you ask the prophet Amos, the absolute worst thing God can do is just to step away and to stop speaking, to give us a famine not of bread, but of the word. What would that look like? Let's talk about that this week in our series on Amos, Good Trouble. So in our journey through the book of Amos so far, there have been a number of times where Amos the prophet has been raised up by God to speak pretty clear words of warning. Disaster is coming for the northern kingdom of Israel. And increasingly, Amos has been clear that at some point they'll go into exile, that some foreign power will come and take over their nation, destroy their kingdom, and maybe carry away people captive, and they will lose their identity. After all, they become so proud and self-possessed and arrogant, they sort of think they're the be-all, end-all, and God has said, that won't last. You'll end up going into exile, you'll lose your king, all the wealth and power and status that the best of the best have accumulated, that will all go away. Now Amos warns of something he thinks is even scarier. And it's not a plague of locusts or fire. In the end, what God says is, what I could send you is a famine, but not a famine of bread or preventing your crops from growing. It will be a famine of my word. I'll stop speaking. Now, in a sense, that's sort of poetic justice. In the end of chapter 7, we saw this scene where the official government-appointed high priest, Amaziah, who was in an alliance with the king and would never question anything the king did as long as the king supported what the priests were doing. Amaziah said to Amos, "We don't want to hear you anymore. Go somewhere else and prophesy, but we don't want to listen to you because you're telling us things we don't like. You're telling us that the king isn't, in fact, in line with God, that this isn't a golden age, and that things aren't great. We don't want to hear it." So, in a sense, Amos just reminds us of that old truth, that sometimes the absolute worst thing God can do is to give you exactly what you ask for. Fine, God says. I'll stop speaking. I'll pull back. You'll see what it's like when you don't have the gift of my word, speaking, communicating, guiding. That's the worst possible sentence, for God to stop speaking. In a way, this sort of riffs on that important line from earlier on in the Torah when the scriptures famously say that we don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. In other words, we depend on God continuing to speak a lot more than maybe we realize. Not only do we need God's day-by-day guidance, of course, not only do we need God speaking out, here's the right way to live in justice and in mercy and abundance and kindness and neighborliness, but if you really want to be technical about it, it's God's word that creates and sustains all creation. If God stops speaking, does the universe fall apart, right? This is really the scariest thing, is if God stops speaking. And what fascinates and also makes me really uncomfortable is what Amos finally comes out and says is the thing that sort of pushed God up to the edge. And honestly, it's not the kind of thing that religious people are often used to identifying as a grave sin. In fact, it's the kind of thing our culture tends to put people on the cover of magazines for. It's the wealth and greed of the people that finally pushes God over the edge. God says, you know what upsets me? That I'm hearing people say, when can we get back to open up our businesses so that we can take advantage of the poor? When can we trample on the needy again? And when can we cheat them? When can we get back to doing those things? And they're upset that they have to stop business on the Sabbath day when they could be making a little more profits and they could be squeezing the poor for a little bit more money. In other words, what God is ultimately most upset about is the way the people's love of stuff has prevented them from loving people, the way money and their pursuit of wealth has got a stranglehold on them. And maybe that they're doing it in a way that they're convinced that they are good, upstanding, respectable religious people. As long as they go to their temples and offer some sacrifices from time to time, God's not allowed to question the bottom line or their prophets. And Amos is here to say, yes, God is allowed to question that. In fact, God is upset that you care more about making bigger piles of money than you do about the needy in your neighborhood. And you care more about acquiring stuff for yourself than you do about the people who are getting stepped on by your business practices. In a very important sense, Amos speaks to our time and place as well, when it's very easy for us to glorify and celebritize people for just having big piles of money. It's easy for us to chase that as the American dream, right? How can I get more, have a bigger nest egg I can retire on, have bigger piles of money? And it's real easy for us to ignore the needs of people around us, or to say, what can I do to make more money even at the expense of other people around us? Amos brings a wake-up call to us as well, that it's a sign if we've replaced greed with goodness as the marker of what really matters in life, then it's like we've stopped listening to God speaking already. God might as well just stop speaking. For followers of Jesus, of course, our hope is that we keep going back to the Word. We keep asking God to speak, not just to bring to life those ancient things that have been recorded in the Scriptures from centuries ago, but for the Spirit to keep speaking a new word. I don't know that we've ever actually thought about that fear, but about just how much our lives depend on continuing to have guidance and a word from God. Amos has revealed the scariest thing isn't a lightning bolt from heaven, but silence. So to deal with that fear, let's go back to God's word. Let's listen to what, in this case, the prophet Amos has to say. We invite you to join us for our study this coming Thursday at 1 o'clock as we dig into Amos chapter 8 and continue to get into good trouble. See you then.